Fallout 76. Is it everything we hoped it would be? Is it something special? Is it something new? Is it what we expected? What's going on, everybody? It's Ghost Robo, and I had the insane opportunity to play a ton of Fallout 76. I got to play for hours, the full game, and experience and explore as much as I wanted, wandering around the entire West Virginian map, coming out of the vault for the first time, creating a character, picking perks, unlocking booster packs, grabbing some gear, taking down bosses, battling other players, and following the main quest, which surprisingly you can do solo very well. Today we're going to dive into exactly how I felt about the game and what it brings to the table and if it's right for you. I think that the most important thing to know about Fallout 76 is that this is a Fallout game online. I think if you look at the trailers, if you've watched the footage and you say, this looks a lot like Fallout 4, but online, you're spot on. This game really, really feels like Fallout 4 online. And to some people, that might be a bit of a bummer because they were expecting something brand spanking new. I think to most people, that'll be a very good thing. I don't really know that you lose much of anything in this transition. Obviously, there are nuances that are removed and things that are added and things that are changed and needed to be made different in order to accommodate an online multiplayer Fallout. But even the loss of, say, NPCs, I found overshadowed by how much this just felt like a comfortable Fallout experience with a ton to do. So you start off in Vault 76, you get to create your character. They have a really cute intro. I think it does a great job of merging tutorial with welcoming you within the world. So the immersion is spot on. The character creator, pretty good this time around. You got a lot of different options for how you can manipulate the face. You take your photo. Of course, there's photo mode in because this is 2018. And then you move through the vault learning about the different aspects. So now there's an emote wheel. And now you have to worry about your food and water a little bit more. And you grab your perk cards because that is the way that you will be picking your special points and then picking your boost as you progress through the levels. Now, I got to play as part of a multiplayer group and as part of a solo me squad, and I found this to be very interesting. I was super excited to see how well you could play Fallout 76 by yourself. As a solo player, as a big fan of single player, as someone who prefers the more linear tried and true experiences, and obviously from this franchise and across the board, would it be possible and would it feel like a gimped version? And I can safely say that you can totally do this solo style. I was able to make it through level 10 without dying. Now, you may wonder about the difficulty, and we'll get into that in a bit, but I wanted to state that to highlight that I did most of that by myself. And as far as I can tell, you can get through a good chunk / maybe even all of the game by yourself. I asked the developers if at any point it flips and you really are needing other players, and they kind of assuaged that by saying there are elements of the game where other players will become really important and really helpful, but it is designed and made in a way that you can go off and experience it as a wild wolf pack of one. And to me, that was a huge victory, that the game does not require you to have friends. The game does not require you to be cooperative. The game does not require you to participate in this, online style if you so choose. By all means, you'll see it. By all means, you probably should partake. And by all means, if you want to accomplish some of the world events where they do have waves and waves of enemies, you probably are going to need a second set of hands. But it's cool to me that you could take 76 in the direction of, hey, I'm playing this by myself. There happens to be other people around. I'm not going to engage in PvP. I'm just going to mess with the main missions, level up my character, build the best, Vault Dweller Wanderer I can, and kind of just take it by myself. Now, they did remove NPCs, and I mentioned that it doesn't feel as much of a bummer as I expected. You've obviously got a different Fallout style here because you're experiencing the story through audio logs and through robots instead of through all sorts of NPC characters and dialogue trees and the sorts. everybody human is gone, save for the live players in the game. All NPCs were killed off. They died. So you'll be experiencing their memories and their stories through audio logs and through coming upon dead bodies and scenes and sights that you can kind of decipher based on what remains. It's a little bit of a shift, but it didn't feel that odd because I think there's still so much to do, and for the most part, the Fallout experience, from the Pip-Boy to the armor and the items to the locales and indoors and outdoors and fighting super mutants, it's all there. It does get a little odd when the Overseer is telling you about the next portion of the main quest and people are blasting each other in the distance and your team is triggering another point of a quest and a radio kicks in and it can become information overload. And I would say you're going to need to be careful as you play this if you want to really digest the story and the lore, that you don't do too much at once, because it can kind of get lost in the sauce per se as the game throws tons at you and you run into a lot. I would say my biggest complaint was probably just the overexposure that I felt at times. You'll have a ton of quests up on the screen. You will have so many markers on your mini-map. It can be a little bit difficult to decipher. And I'm sure as you play and hours in, once you get your bearings and once you just really wrap your head around the system, it won't feel so complicated. But for a bit there, I was kind of feeling overwhelmed. And that's something I don't experience often in games just because I play so many and I know exactly what they have to offer for the most part. You've got diamonds on the minimap, stars on the minimap, points of interest, dots for players. It can become cumbersome. And I think managing and mitigating your list of quests and what you have active, what you're tracking and paying attention and making sure that your multiplayer group isn't distracting you. And if you do want to main path it, it will require some focus. But basically, once you get through the beginning section and you pick up your weapons and you grab your first perk and you level up and you check out what's going on with the different workbenches and whatnot, you can kind of just go wherever you want. If you want to go all the way up north to Wavy Willards, you can do that. If you want to go all the way east and see what lurks, you can do that. You want to head to the Mothman Museum straight away, you can do that. And while you do that, combat is something that you will come across often. Now, VATS is in the game, but I found VATS to be very, very, very weird. Because this VATS, the enemies and the world still moves. Which, I don't want to say it completely destroys VATS, but it definitely dilutes it. Because VATS is a strategic way to specifically target limbs. And you can still specifically target, you can still scroll through. But to me, VATS is now more a way to manage multiple enemies and make sure you can spot them versus a comprehensive way to engage in combat. I think the aim and shoot mechanic is going to be much more effective, and where you rely, what you rely on, I think that's the way to go. And it felt to me that the game maintained a better flow and was more just that's what it was meant for. I feel like the way that Fallout 4 began to trend with the gunplay is just it's a further evolution here with 76, and that's how you're going to spend, I would guess, 90+% of your combat time just aiming and shooting. It's just weird when you're aiming at a mole rat in VATS and it's moving out of frame, but you're still getting the percentage, and you're trying to tweak between its torso and its head. It just felt off. You can use it. I really didn't like it so much. But combat itself is pretty prevalent. It's not, I would say it's not as over the top as maybe you'd worry. This is still a wasteland where exploration is the focus. And I did think that was a unique, interesting aspect of this as an online multiplayer game, that sort of these serene, quiet moments are definitely still the focal point here. And definitely still, to me, the big point of immersion, that you are coming across this for the first time for yourself, investigating, exploring, taking on quests, And talking to robots, that really helps. Honestly, the fact that they don't consider robots NPCs and they're NPRs, non-playable robots, it's good that they're there. It does add some life, I think, to an otherwise desolate world. Because your interactions with other players, that was another part I found a little bit odd. The PvP is made to eliminate as much trolling and griefing as possible. So I'm sure you've heard Todd Howard talk about, or you've read about, that they really, if you don't want to engage in PvP, people are going to do barely any damage, and they really do. So the other side of combat is when you're attacked by players, or when you come across some angry humans, and they can shoot you if they want. It's going to do such little damage that it will become quickly annoying for both parties. Annoying for you because you're getting nicked as you try to run around and explore this world, maybe solo, maybe taking on the story, maybe just wandering. And annoying for the other player because they're doing virtually nothing to you unless you engage, where then they try and really equalize out the damage dealt based on, so it's not based on levels. But I spent a good couple minutes just walking away from someone, trying to do what I wanted to do and getting punk shotted in the back. Virtually no damage, zero risk. I didn't even need to use a stim pack, but it was a little bit annoying. So I'm curious how PvP will eventually shape out. It seems to be, at least in my time playing, kind of a non-factor, and that was enhanced by the rewards being so low. I think at one point I did kill a murderer, who are the players that become so obstinate and so uncooperative, they're marked on the map as a bounty, and I think I got 6 caps. I don't know what you can buy with 6 caps, but it sure isn't much. It's definitely not a new gun, and it's definitely not anything good. In terms of loot and the way that gear operates within Fallout 76, you can craft a whole ton of stuff. You'll be getting recipes, blueprints, and you'll be building your arsenal, weapons, armor, projectiles, all sorts of stuff. And that's where collecting the junk around the world becomes important. But loot is also a factor here, and you will be getting goodies from completing quests, from passing world events, and from just stumbling upon interesting areas. And that's where most of the great stuff is going to come. My best guns, the ones that I was really glad I had, did come from certain side quests and world events. I ended up getting a really good scoped weapon that helped me obliterate a village of super mutants. Whereas if I was using my pipe revolver that I started with, it was going to take a lot of time and a lot of shots. Now, resources are something you're going to want to manage. It might seem like you have a ton, and they do start you off very heavy loaded, but that is something that will begin to dwindle. And if you blow through a bunch of your ammo and your stim packs early, you might reach a point where you're kind of screwed. And not to like, oh, you're screwed and you can't continue, but you would need to spend a lot of time just collecting. I wish the game was a little bit more, I wish it telegraphed that a little bit more, because it feels like, wow, I've got 17 stim packs, I can just burn through these. But frankly, if you're a solid player, I don't think you'll really run into much issue. You can conserve your ammunition. Melee weapons are obviously an option early and often, and I didn't really need stim packs. I'd say one of my complaints about the game, and obviously it'll probably change as you move through, was it was very easy. And I don't know if that's a conscious decision, so that your experience is more important than your life and death. But given the fact that you do need to sort of manage water and food and health, it was so back burner for me, it almost became inconsequential throughout my hours. And again, I'm sure as you progress to level 20 and 30 and 40 and deeper into the game and move into the end game, it'll be more of a factor. But for me, it wasn't. Yeah, I took some rat away, I think twice, because I stepped in some really icky water. But I'd never felt threatened, even when I came across big groups of Scorch, the new enemy type here, that are tied directly into the main quest and tied directly into the lore. This hive mind burned out group of kind of ghouls that now, I guess I don't know. That's apparently something you have to figure out, how they were created, where they're from, and what they want. But you'll be able to manage very well, fighting against robots, fighting against some bigger creatures, even a boss that I came across, a big flying menace. He could do a lot of damage, but because it was being engaged by a bunch of players, I very barely was battered. I didn't even feel bruised. Well, I took a couple stim packs, I guess, but not to a level where I was just, on the ropes. So those bigger encounters will test you and will challenge you. But to me, it felt a little bit more like a battle of, who could last the longest versus something specifically challenging. And I don't know, maybe that's just a me thing with Fallout, but it wasn't very hard throughout. And because the PvP is structured in a way that it is almost discouraged, I'm curious where the challenge will come from. Another aspect that I found something like I didn't even engage with was the camp system, the base building. Now, you can set up camp, and for those of you who are a little bit more creatively inclined or more cosmetically inclined, you can build your own base, and you can fill it with all sorts of fun stuff, and you can get really granular, like in Fallout 4, and build out walls and beds and all sorts of lamps and lights and things of that sort. But to me, the main benefit of the camps are the workbenches, and those are strewn about. I found a number of those in the world, and frequently enough that I didn't feel I needed to make my own. In fact, I never dropped my own camp. And maybe I'm a weird player for doing that, but it really was okay, and I didn't feel the need. You'll find stash boxes where you can hide your stuff, and then access it at another place and point where you find another stash box. Those aren't able to be stolen from other sneaky players. And those are even out amongst the world. So it wasn't an issue of, oh God, I'm missing out on this aspect of the game. It just felt like the game supported me in doing what the main point of a camp is, at least functionally, that I didn't need to focus on it myself. But again, if you want to go cosmetic and you want to go creative, you can. They have instanced the loot, so you don't need to worry about it being stolen. Obviously, these are simple things that you can probably expect from an online multiplayer-focused game. It's interesting to note that the player count is not all that huge. Remember, this is not like a 200 Wanderer server, so you don't have a ton of people on your server. You don't have a ton of people, and again, that plays into this, like, hey, you're wandering, you're just kind of exploring, and I like that. I think that's really, really great. 24 players is what they are saying for the servers, and that seems like a good number. The game is very big, and I wouldn't want to be running into people at every turn, because as I mentioned, the frustration and the annoyance you can find when you do come across someone that's hell-bent on hitting you over and over again, I wouldn't want to deal with that too often. But if you want to go out there and form a team of raiders and really try to inflict hurt, you could do that. But you might find some spaced out locations. And they have a fast travel system where you can instantly fast travel to your team. You can spend caps to fast travel to places that you've been before. Again, the threat of death is not very high, but you can return to Vault 76. And you can move about this map pretty quickly. The load times on more of a performance discussion were pretty darn good. I was impressed with how quickly things moved, given the online structure and given how big this game was. It wasn't a problem. There were definitely frame issues. There was definitely lag. Now, they said that this was being worked on, as you can imagine, hour by hour, day by day, and they're going to try to get it as solid as possible to have a consistent 30 when the game launches on consoles next month. Will they get there completely? I don't know. It definitely reared its head problem-wise when there were a bunch of enemies on screen, but frankly, that's not all that often. It's more of a world event thing, and world events, as you can imagine, are these scenarios where you stumble upon, hey, like this farm is being attacked, we need to defend it, or there's waves of Scorch coming in. That is where other players become very beneficial. Those are, some of them I think, I don't know if they'd be too tough in terms of unaccomplishable, but they definitely would be time consuming and cumbersome without other players. And so I was glad to have others there. Some really sweet rewards came out of those, and some were even lore enhanced by, like, hey, you need to venture underground and reset the parameters for these bots. Even though you already blew them up, we need to make sure that they don't come back and bother us again. I think sort of the resetting and the replayability of the world is something I'm very curious about. It is a big map. There are a lot of interesting points of interest, a lot of landmarks. Hopefully the points of interest are interesting. They were to me: water park, nuclear power plant, Mothman Museum, just to call out a few. But once you've been there, and if you decide to sort of circumvent the story path and just explore around, once that is gone of discovering and of sort of stumbling upon, what then? There are daily quests, there are all sorts of challenges, and they have promised to keep the content coming for as long as they can. But will you want to just return and return? If the hunt is for gear, if the hunt is for XP, that makes sense. Once you reach those final levels, you can start playing a more dangerous game with nuclear codes, and then with these irradiated zones where you'll need your special armor, and you'll go in and face off against very difficult foes for very difficult gear. I think how fleshed out that endgame is going to really be important here, because if the player interaction is more limited by nature of the game and by the structure of the series, the content becomes even more of a king, and the replayability and the freshness of said quests and said dailies and said world events really, it will need to be spot on. And if you've already been to the water park and you've been to the museum and you've been to the logging camp and you've been to the roller coaster and you've been to the raised homes and you've been to the swamp, will you come back for these audio log driven story quests? Will you come back for the gear? What is going to be the incentive and what's going to motivate you? And I think that, to me, is the biggest question that remains with Fallout 76. Beyond I beat the game, quote, beat the game, the story, the main path. I've seen all the areas. I have pretty good gear. What is the incentive to keep playing? Does PvP tip into a way where it's really awesome and it is something you want to engage in and it's not something rare and kind of discouraged? Is it that you just are kind of really at that point snowballing with better and better guns and better gear and better cosmetics? Because your cosmetics do take precedence and they will go over your armor, so you can have the stats you like plus the specific look you like. I think that's obviously a really good inclusion. But what then? Because to me, the greatest feature of Fallout 76 was that it felt like Fallout with other players, yet I was still experiencing West Virginia, wandering around as a wasteland warrior should. What then? And that's sort of where I'll leave you, because it's TBD. You got to play the whole game. You're going to have to see, and when you get there, is this going to be a limited adventure that you get through and you're like, okay, I'm good? Or is there enough to keep coming back? And I'm unsure of that. But overall, my experience, I think, was very, very strong. I don't think it's doing anything miraculous. I don't think it's doing anything brand spanking new. It is definitely Fallout online in a new world with a lot to do and see, and with 23 other vault dwellers wandering around, maybe annoying you, probably helping you, and possibly being your friends and building bases and really taking those systems to the hilt. I think you will feel right at home if you've played Fallout 4. It will feel very comfortable, and as I mentioned, for most players, that's a great thing. So, for me, Fallout 76, a pretty solid thumbs up. I don't think it gets glorious marks yet, because I still have questions, and I want to know how it's able to evolve beyond sort of the main structure and what I know Fallout to be. But so far, so good, and I am impressed that they were able to handle things in a way that felt familiar while also exploring a new genre for Fallout and for Bethesda. That is a pretty cool accomplishment, and I think how familiar and comfortable I felt, while on one hand could be a bit of a bummer and sort of mundane, actually speaks to the prowess in their design and the polish that they have put into this experience. So that is Fallout 76. I have tons of content. If you have any specific questions or want to know anything, let me know in the comments below. I'll be reading through and try to address as much as I can. I've got a lot more videos coming your way, checking out some of the cool locations I mentioned, doing the walkthrough stuff, looking at the map, and we'll explore the coolest elements and maybe even some of the concerns some more with Fallout 76. Thank you guys and girls so much for watching. Curious to hear your take after listening to mine. Let me know in the comments down below. Hit that like button if you're pumped for the game and want to see more. Until next time, drink some hot chocolate, make sure it's not radiated, and we will see you all later.